So Apple held their worldwide developers conference, and typically I'll kind of glance over some of the information that comes out of it, but I don't really watch the entire show that they have. I'm not as into the Apple ecosystem as I think other people may be, but there are some parts of the Apple product lineup that I will keep an eye on, specifically their PC lineup currently, personal computer, MacBooks, whatever you want to call them now. But I'll at least keep an eye on them because I am absolutely fascinated with what Apple has been able to do with their own custom chip, that M1, and they've introduced an M2 now. Not only that, but to go along with it, they have some updates on the gaming side that I think surprised a lot of people because it could actually show Apple maybe becoming a bit more interested in having a gaming presence. Guys, if you enjoy these videos, make sure you hit that like button, helps out a ton. And if you're new here to the Spawn Wave Plus channel, make sure you subscribe down below. So they did have the M2 that they presented. That's coming later this year. New MacBook Air, new MacBook Pro. I do use a MacBook Pro actually here for recording and editing and that. And then I also have a MacBook Air that actually works really well in like a recording environment, mostly because there's no fan. So it doesn't make any noise. It's a very impressive machine in that sense. It's able to do a lot without needing any kind of active cooling. Now, the M2 takes that to the next level, 8-core CPU, 10-core GPU. They showed off a bunch of graphs that are scaled in their favor, obviously, because then they put PCs that should be significantly more powerful right next to it, and then they just gobble up a ton of electricity in order to do that. But when they compared it to their M1, it's 50% more memory bandwidth, I think up to 100 gigabytes per second, 35% more GPU performance. And the thing with the M1 and now the M2 that I really like is that Apple seems to have a major focus on power efficiency, which, as someone who has used a lot of gaming laptops in the past, it is really annoying to deal with them because as soon as you start doing really anything intensive, the machine generally kicks up super loud fans. The thing becomes very hot, and typically the battery life goes to almost nothing. But that's actually been the opposite experience that I've had with like my MacBook Pro with that M1. It's actually a fairly pleasant experience to use on battery for things like editing video. The only issue I've run into is Apple really has no major gaming presence. So if I go on Steam, there's like a handful. It's like a little section. It's basically a handful in the grand scheme of things with Steam that will natively work on the MacBook. Now, they have layers that will essentially translate over like Windows stuff to Mac, and it'll let you run that, but it's not getting the full power of that M1 or just the ability that it has when you run something native. But games that I have been able to run natively on the MacBook Air, not even like the Pro, but the Air, it's been pretty impressive. Like Batman Arkham City. Sure, it's an older game, but it runs at like 60 frames per second on the Air, which again doesn't have a fan. It just runs passively. So when I hear that they had like an entire gaming section at this worldwide developers conference, I was a little caught off guard, but then I looked into it a bit more, and it actually seems like Apple may be setting themselves up for, I don't know, maybe an actual run at this gaming thing. That has to do with some of the new developments they've had around these custom chips with this new M2. Metal FX is this upscaling technique that they introduced, and it's going to essentially do what like DLSS, or I guess closer to AMD's super effect, like their super resolution that they have. DLSS is pretty advanced right now using neural networks, and it has some incredible results, but it's very specific to certain RTX cards, right? Whereas super resolution will work on pretty old cards even. Now, Apple, of course, with their Metal FX works on their own chips, the M1, M2, and all of this, right? And it's going to do something similar where it takes lower resolution images, upscales them, applies things like temporal anti-aliasing for a better looking image than what you'd have if you used like that 720p or 540p image. And based on what I've seen out of DLSS or super resolution, the benefits generally outweigh the image maybe being a little blurry when you start moving the camera around heavily. But it does look like Apple has been able to reel in some developers with this. No Man's Sky will be using this Metal Effects upscaling technique, as well as RE Village, which when they brought that out, I was again a little surprised that they went that far and Capcom got on board with it, and they described how it's running basically like, oh, it's effortlessly running at 1080p on the MacBook Air for RE Village using this upscaling technique, which, yeah, again, that's pretty impressive for a MacBook Air since, there's no fan or anything in there. But then something like the Mac Studio, which is much more expensive, that just running at 4K. Again, Macs aren't known for gaming, so when we hear something like, oh, a 4K game like RE Village will run on it, I mean, yeah, that'll get people to pay attention. But the thing to really consider here is that these chips, this M lineup that Apple has developed and is working to continue to iterate on, goes across many of their platforms, like the iPad. Like, can you imagine having RE Village eventually running on your iPad? Not like an iPad version of it, like actual RE Village running on your tablet. That'd be pretty impressive there. And then also like the Mac Studio, MacBook, iPad, but being able to take, of course, your game save across all these, and like there are a lot of possibilities here when it comes to this new M lineup, and Apple seeming to develop for it. They even have like a faster way to load some textures and different things from these games that Microsoft did with Windows Direct Storage. I think NVIDIA also worked on something recently as well. Basically, it allows any of the information they need for drawing images on screen or processing in the game to go from your storage to your CPU much more efficiently. Basically, less steps to get there, and they're developing something for Metal 3 as well. My only concern with this is, will Apple actually be serious going forward? They have this Apple Arcade subscription service that's been flying under the radar, but they have quietly been getting more and more games in there that are exclusive to the subscription service. And now we see them working to develop more on the back end to maybe entice developers to come on board of this ecosystem that is much more solid now than it was previously when they had Intel and AMD and they had chips and video cards and GPUs all over the place. Now it's much more refined and focused, which for developers might be something they would actually look into if that means that they can have their game running across all these different platforms with a ton of people to sell games to. But we'll see what happens as we go forward. I'm very curious about RE Village when we eventually get benchmarks and some of these independent sources look into it and are able to compare it with image quality and frame rate and all of this. I'm sure Digital Foundry will be all over that one. But let me know what you guys think about this one down below. Do you believe that Apple really is going to be taking gaming seriously as we go along? Thanks, guys, for watching, and I'll see you next time.